Sit back, hold your shape, be disciplined, roll around on the floor a little bit, get in their heads, play on the counter, cause a little bit of chaos, and reduce their set pieces in dangerous areas. The blueprint to stifle the Socceroos is as plain as it is widely available to all of their opponents, and frustratingly, we don't seem to be that close to any solutions. Bahrain's first goal against Australia in 18 years, a deflected cross with the last touch to Harry Suter, sinks the Socceroos to a loss in the opening game of the third phase of World Cup qualifiers. Whilst the path is easier this time around, in a group with Japan and Saudi Arabia, the Socceroos are already on the back foot. In the A-League and in true derby fashion, the Wanderers say anything you can do, I can do better to Sydney FC, as Western Sydney announced the signing of Spanish World Cup winner Juan Mata. Is he the best A-League marquee since Del Piero, or perhaps Douglas Costa? The Socceroos clause is officially being revoked. The Kiwi Classico sounds very similar to our homework, and the Raw complete a rare international tour for an A-League club on this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast, supported by Manscaped. Use code ROUNDBALL for 20% off and free shipping at checkout. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight is Will Booth. Will, hello to you. Kiwi Classico, Kiwi Clash. I don't know, there's only a few letters difference between there. I feel like we were onto something, even after all the objections that we got online.
Yeah, we were on the right path for sure, and I reckon we should be looking at some sort of royalty arrangement for that one, for sure.
Jacob Stevens, hello to you. They didn't go with the extra K, though.
They didn't, and I think that there were some pretty good reasons raised as to why you should avoid having multiple Ks next to each other, which I think is fairly reasonable.
Yes, looking back, reasonable indeed. We will get onto that, but of course the big story is today is that the Socceroos have fallen at their first fixture on the Gold Coast, 1-0 against the travelling Bahrain outfit. Jacob, it felt like Bahrain knew exactly what they needed to do to beat perhaps not even beat the Socceroos, but at least earn a result. And the goal, the deflection off Harry Suter was definitely a bonus, but it's a famous victory for them. They carried out their game plan, it looks like, as well as they could have, and the Socceroos again left feeling frustrated.
And while I think it's fair to be frustrated at it because it's pretty anti-football the way that they played, right? I don't think that's a harsh statement to make, but it's also a case of the Socceroos just didn't do enough to be able to deal with it. They kept getting drawn into these challenges that Bahrain were then milking for fouls. They couldn't keep the ball on the floor, which meant that there were lots of these high boots and challenges up in the air and things like that, which again, Bahrain were milking for fouls. It was just very stop-start, and the Socceroos are playing into their hands. So it was perfectly done by Bahrain to be able to go about their business in the manner that they did. And a lot of the complaints that are sort of coming from what we've seen from this match are very similar. They remind me a lot of the early days of the Asian Champions League when A-League clubs were competing in it, and how, a lot of the Asian clubs, the way that they like to play was to, draw a lot of fouls, slow the game down, have their players on the floor almost as much as possible. And Bahrain have done that and shown why it can still be so effective, because teams that are used to, an open flowing game of football, when all of a sudden it's not like that and they don't have the space or the time on the ball, or they're constantly being drawn into challenges that they shouldn't be, they're unable to actually do anything with it. And I think that there's fair criticism to be made of the Socceroos and the way that they set up, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. But I think in terms of the way that Bahrain went about it, it was a case of they knew what they were here to do. They weren't going to walk away with a loss. I don't think, even if they'd have gone a goal down, I think that it would have they'd have just turned it up at another level and gone even further into it. And look, it was a fortunate deflection for Bahrain that got them their goal, but that sort of stuff happens in football. And, it was the fact that they were able to stay so resolute for the 90 minutes to keep it at 0-0 to, for that to be the winning goal. Without the way that they had played, that might not have been the case for them.
Yeah, I do wonder, Will, perhaps if they spent a couple of days at Wet and Wild during their time on the Gold Coast, because there was plenty of splashing around, which made the game very hard to watch at sometimes. It is worth classifying that, Cassini Yengi made contact to the throat. I think that red card is by the book, but the rest of it extremely hard to watch, particularly down that right-hand side where Alessandro Tricati was asked to play tonight. Just constant rolling around and fouls. it makes it tough.
Yeah, the Socceroos just look like they never built momentum, and that's what the point of kind of rolling around the floor like they did is. They just stifled Australia in especially in attack. Like they couldn't get two phases of play back to back. It seemed like they couldn't hold on to the ball for extended periods because it was just so stop start, and they're the games that you don't really want to play, and it definitely didn't help any of our creative problems. I think that just it stifles the momentum, and we usually keep the ball build up enough to kind of just dominate games like that, but it couldn't dominate this game. It was kind of, they made it really hard to. So credit to them as much as it pains people to kind of watch those type of games. But yeah, I think the balance in midfield was kind of the biggest issue for me today. It was just crying out for a more creative player, and I think we miss Hrustic a lot because he is often the player that's done that in these sorts of games. He's able to step up and kind of just add another element to it. So I don't know, when the midfield three they're all fantastic players in their own right, Irvine, Metcalf, and O'Neill, but they all just offer the same thing really. Mm-hmm. So I don't really see the point of starting just all three of them there. And the shape looks tired. I think Graham Arnold's always been a few cycles behind in tactical innovation, right? He's always just a little slow to get there. And it's surprising because we did look so good recently in the previous couple of games. But this game is just evidence that, it's just stale in the middle. And I think the build-up, all three of those midfielders just were kind of in the, looking for that ball off the centre-backs, just in the same space, kind of moving around slow. It just did not look like anything that is like better teams play. And it's not that hard to make slight adjustments to get it working, but I think we need to play at maximum one defensive pivot and maybe the fullback kind of inverts next to them, and then get more advanced, you'd say, like the attacking eights in there. They just weren't high up enough the field to be effective. So even if they were receiving the ball from straight from the centre backs, it was just in weak areas of the field, and then they just had a Bahrain block in front of them. So it's very frustrating, and I think a whole balance and shift of the setup needs to be looked at.
And one of the things I noticed as well, which really frustrated me, even though I didn't really have a dog in the fight, right? But I'm English, and the reason I don't completely despise the Socceroos is because of the amount of Adelaide United former players in the squad. But even when the ball was worked out wide, and you're sort of then looking to bring it back into the middle, tighten up the shape at the Bahrain backline, and then flick it back out wide again. It was the likes of O'Neill were receiving the ball in the middle and then just turning straight back towards the defenders. You've got to turn upfield and look to progress the ball, and it just looked like there was absolutely none of that. No intent in the midfield to do that. They were happy to just keep possession and recycle it rather than actually turn upfield and look to progress the ball, which is something that's okay if it's one of your players is doing that, because you do want somebody who's there to keep possession in those tight areas. But when it's every single one of your central midfielders, you're just not going to be able to generate anything. And you could tell that the wingers and the fullbacks had absolutely no support going forwards, because the ball would go into the midfield and it was like a black hole, because it would just disappear again and go right back to the back line. So, it just felt like even when Australia were trying to do something different and they were trying to get the ball out wide, they just didn't have the assistance through the centre anyway to be able to make it an effective move.
About 3-4 months ago, when we finished off the second round of qualifiers, we had this one game, I forget who our opponent was, but where we had Aiden Hrustic and Riley McGree both starting in more advanced roles in that midfield. And it hurts even more because those players, McGree is injured, Hrustic was sorting out his club future. He hadn't played football, so they were unavailable for this window. But just the fact that we've seen a little bit of glimpse of it, and it just hasn't been able to be maintained. The cries for Alex Robinson and why he wasn't in the squad will only intensify after this game. I think the only player that's in this current squad that really offers that kind of midfield creativity is Josh Nisbet. Perhaps we see him a little more next game, I'm not sure, but I agree with your point, Will, that the three midfielders we have kind of offer similar options and profiles, and we mentioned briefly last week, I'm not actually really sure about the future of Jackson Irvine in this team. I think if you had those two creative midfields, probably leaning towards either a Kieran Backus Keanu Backus or Aidan O'Neill in that role, and then you got the advanced midfielders as well. So it's been a constant criticism of Graham Arnold's Socceroos team for probably at least 18 months, is those kind of creative midfield roles. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. We also had a bit of an experiment, though, in this game, Jacob, at right back. We know we were short on left backs. The right back has always been a very rotated place as well.
Yeah.
But what's happened tonight is actually a bit of a trend of what we've seen in European football and world football, is that if you don't have any good fullbacks, just chuck another good centre-back in. Alessandro Giacatti asked to play at right back with Sutar and Rouse in the middle, and then Aziz Bayic on the left. He pushed up the field. Alessandro sometimes went up the right as well, sometimes in this kind of three at the back. How do you judge that experiment after 90 minutes?
It was interesting. Like you said, it's sort of the trend at the moment to do that. And usually it happens, though, with a centre-back who has experience in that sort of a position. But as Alessandro said after the game, it's a role he's never been asked to play in his career before. So it's something completely new and foreign to him. And it was quite interesting, actually, when we had him on the podcast, he was talking about how the times he's played for the Socceroos, Graham Arnold has told him, just do what you do for your club. And this is asking him to do something completely different than that. And look, I don't think it was an abject failure. And I think that had the Socceroos won, we'd have looked at it and gone, it kind of worked out. There was a good idea there, but I think because of the result and the way that there was just no creativity in the side, it perhaps didn't look like it was as good a move as you could probably theorize it was going to be. Look, you've just got to do what you can, and when you've got such a lack of quality in those fullback positions, you've got to do something. But I think that there's maybe other ways to go about it, right? You could play a back three, with three really solid centre backs, and then have the fullbacks as these advanced wing backs, which is basically what Bayic was doing all game anyway. And then you don't need a proper, right back, because you can play, sort of a slightly deeper winger on the right, and that sort of works out that way. And you could be looking at completely different sort of structure there, but it doesn't seem like that's the way that Arnie wants to go. He wants to have that back four, because there's just a lot more that you can do with a back four in terms of both in and out of possession shapes and structures than you can when you've got the back three with the two wing backs. You're sort of set in stone there. You have to have a back three almost at all times, unless you're crazy enough to have one of those centre backs step up into the midfield. So, it does sort of limit the options there, but the options are limited already anyway. I think he showed a little bit of intent going forwards, which I liked, but it wasn't particularly effective. And he was one of the players you mentioned before, Lockie. Bahrain were really focusing their efforts on him to, try and draw him into challenges and get him to foul them. And, it happened a couple of times. He obviously got that yellow card, which we could debate whether or not that's a yellow for days. It was very, very harsh call. But, again, it's what Bahrain wanted to do. They set out to do it, and they did it perfectly. And I think it's perhaps, the combination of never having played in that role before, so just getting drawn into these situations where he just shouldn't be because he's not used to it. But also a case of, again, it feels like Arnie has reached a point where when he can't field the exact 11 that he wants and that he envisions as being sort of his project going forwards, then it's these same old problems that we're talking about happening. So look, it was an experiment, didn't work out particularly well, but it also wasn't the worst of things. But I do think that going forwards, right back's going to be a big question, as is obviously those advanced midfielder roles. We've had Strain play there in the past, but he's almost always injured. Gethin Jones became the scapegoat of that Asian Cup campaign. Chikati isn't a right back. We've got Bovalina in the wings, but he's 4 years down the line before he becomes Lewis Miller. Yeah, it just seems like there's not really an ironed-on option there at the moment, and it might be a case of we're going to see sort of similar experiments moving forwards for the foreseeable future.
What we did today is probably what we have to keep on trying, but I just think you can get that balance a lot better across the three that stay and who that man is that goes down the right. I think it probably even like something as simple as swapping roles and and Chikati today might have been more effective. I don't know. I think with Boss at left back, I see this working a lot better. So yeah, I think it is a symptom of kind of having other positions out as well, which highlights the lack of quality and, you know, tactical fit that we have here. So no, and it's another thing is that it's interesting with Yangi on a red to see who, like, you know, obviously it's going to be Duke. Taggart's there as well. I don't know if you want to play Duke on his own. It was best. Duke looked at his best when he was next to Yangi. So yeah, it remains to be seen kind of what we do in that game.
Yeah, I agree. It will be interesting. Like, I really hope that Chikati at right back is just to kind of break glass in case of emergency, because obviously Lewis Miller picked up a knock to his knee, I think it was, in this camp and was unable to start. So I'm sure that would have been the preference going into it. Obviously Thomas Deng's there as well. So maybe, you know, Kai Rao's home is on the Gold Coast. Arnie wanted to give minutes there as well. Maybe that's just kind of how it shook out for this game. But we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of Chikati himself, I really want to see him playing at left centre back for an extended period of time. And this leads me on to my next point about the fact that Nesta Irankunda has to be starting games for me now for the Socceroos. Arnold has talked consistently about always looking forwards towards the 26 World Cup in North America. He used that line even when he was selecting his Asian Cup squad. If you're serious about this, we need to be picking our players that we think are going to be there in their preferred positions playing game for the Socceroos. So that applies to Chikati, that applies to Nesta. You're looking at him and Martin Boyle. You're going to pick a 20-year-old Irankunda who's had 2 years at Bayern, or a 33-year-old Martin Boyle who's been playing in Scotland. And no disrespect to Boyle, he's been a great servant for the nation, but I think it's quite a clear choice who you're going to be going with. And Jacob, I just think he needs to be starting games now. Just all the excuses are out the window now. He just needs to be starting games.
It's Boyle is. I don't quite know how to describe the style of player that he is and the way that he plays. He kind of looks, when you watch him, especially for the Socceroos, he looks like a 10 that's being told to play on the wing. He likes to play in that half space a lot, and that just causes congestion, because when you've got, you know, 2 8s in the team as well, and you've got a striker, and Arnie likes to play with 2 strikers at times as well. So, you know, that's just adding more congestion into those areas. So he just doesn't get free enough. He doesn't provide enough of a threat. And he's much more of a support player. Well, I think actually might work well dropped back into the midfield, but that's a point for another day. But you're completely right in the Irankunda. Not only just a case of getting him minutes in his preferred position, but he's easily the better player and much more of an attacking and goal-scoring threat than Martin Boyle. And like I said, look, there's no disrespect to Boyle, but that's just not the style of player that he is. And it's especially in these games where you need somebody to just be able to be a bit bullish and take the initiative and try and do something. And Irankunda came on, and by the time he came on, you could tell the Socceroos were already getting frustrated, and it was playing into Bahrain's hands more and more and more, and that just didn't give him the opportunity to get into the game that we would have liked to see. But you can imagine what it would be like to have Irankunda out there, to have Goodwin on the left, and then whoever it is that's going to be up front. That's a dynamic that is just going to work so well. It worked so well for Adelaide United, obviously, as well, which, you know, I made a joke in the group chat that they should just fill the Australian starting 11 with Adelaide United players and see how that goes. But no, like it worked at the club level because Irankunda offers that goal scoring threat, and Goodwin has just got such a good delivery. And we saw it in this game as well, right? Like he was consistently generating the best chances for the Socceroos. And when he was taken off, all of a sudden, those deliveries from out wide completely died, and there wasn't that threat there. You know, having the pair of them on the wings would be such a danger, because it doesn't allow the defence to focus their attentions on one part of the pitch. Because when you've got those threats on either side, it means that they're going to be stretched thin, because they're going to have to try and cover the whole length of the pitch and the whole width of the pitch to contain them both. You know, and you don't get that with Boyle, because like I said, he plays in that half space, he plays a little bit more narrow, and he does seem, when he's playing for Australia, to look much more like a midfielder that's trying to play out wide than a winger, which is something that I think, you know, Will was touching on, that there was a lack of threat from out wide in this game, and that's perhaps in part because of the fact that we only really had one winger in the side, and so that threat wasn't going to be able to come naturally. So on a bunch of fronts there, it just makes so much more sense to get Aaron Kunda into the team. The couple of reasons why you wouldn't is not playing at the highest level, right? He's playing in the 4th division in Germany, which looks worse than the A-League, and he's also obviously still very young and inexperienced at this level, but he's going to remain inexperienced if you don't get him those minutes. So, that's kind of an argument that works against itself, I suppose. But no, I'm completely with you, Lockie, that Aaron Kunda should be getting minutes here.
I don't think I've said this on the pod yet, but I had made a prediction in our group chat, or maybe it was on Twitter, one of the two. I reckon he'll get 3 goals for the senior Bayern team this year. He's going to come off the bench. He's going to get a few opportunities. It hurts that Kingsley Coman didn't go away on transfer deadline though. We thought that might happen. But there you go. Nesta 3 goals. Interesting stat for you, Will. Approximately maybe 50 minutes into the game, something like that, the Socceroos set a new national team record for minutes without conceding in World Cup qualifiers. The record broken was 749, ended quite soon afterwards. But it's interesting because we've had, the world record for the longest consecutive win streak in World Cup qualifiers as well. But as soon as we get to the third phase, it's like, what are we doing here? The records seem to fall down almost instantly.
Yeah, it's a mental block, and I don't know. You just get tested a little bit in one. That's all it takes. But no, it's very impressive to kind of be setting these records for sure. So, I mean, you want to test yourself against the better teams, and as soon as we do, it maybe opens up a lot of defensive issues that we just aren't able to see in games against lesser opposition. They don't test us in the ways where Graham Arnold has to work out what's wrong at the back and kind of make adjustments. So no, it's kind of good that this record's done and we can address maybe some issues rather than just going with what's worked, because maybe we just haven't been tested enough.
I actually disagree slightly there that there's defensive issues. I thought the defense was actually really good today. I thought that they looked really, really strong and solid, and it was just an unfortunate deflection, that happens in these games. It was actually a case of the rest of the team not being up to standard that meant that was the goal that decided it. In an ideal circumstance, that would have made it, 2-3-1. Oh, well, it would have been tough last 5-6 minutes, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas here, because there was absolutely nothing going forwards, that's the goal that decided it. And I thought that Suter had a solid game, playing a lot of long balls forward. It wasn't particularly accurate all the time with it, but it showed a good initiative to try and get the ball forward. I thought Chikati looked really good on the ball as well. He was getting a lot of those switches out towards Goodwin, which worked really well. Kai Rolls was solid, barely put a foot wrong. I thought the defence actually was really strong. It remains to be seen how strong they will be, because we do have a couple of obviously pretty solid teams in this qualifying group. And how they perform against them, that remains to be seen. But I thought that actually they were all right tonight. And it is a bit of a shame for them that this record doesn't go on, because, that was from their hard work. And it was, a lack of hard work from the rest of the team, perhaps, that caused it to fall apart. But you're also right, Will, in that they can sort of put it behind themselves now and just sort of start with a clean slate and go again.
Yeah, it was more like, in general, I think we get found out at this stage because, we just we don't have that game or the games that kind of let us work out what works best, because it's just never able to be seen. And definitely these upcoming qualifiers will, hopefully let us answer some more questions that we haven't had to address yet.
Yeah, so the other result tonight is that Japan have beaten China 7-0, so an ominous start for them. And in this group, with Japan and Saudi Arabia, where we have to finish top 2 to get automatic qualification to the World Cup, we've already slipped up on a banana peel against Bahrain. We're going to have to earn results against at least one of those 2 teams now if we want to get automatic qualification, which, remember, is supposed to be a fair bit easier than the previous cycles. And somehow it seems like we're going down the similar story again. But we'll leave that there until Indonesia on Tuesday. For the second game of this window. Of course, the beauty of this time of year is that we have a window pretty much every month as the season just gets rolling before we get to Christmas. So there'll be plenty of opportunity to talk Socceroos. But let's head back to the A-League because the Western Sydney Wanderers have responded to Douglas Costa's arrival in Sky Blue by announcing the signing of Spanish maestro Juan Mata. We talked about Costa's CV a little while ago. You have to say that Mata's is probably gets the edge. A World Cup win and a European Championships with Spain, one UEFA Champions League with Chelsea, 2 Europa Leagues, Turkish champion, Japanese champion, English FA Cup, Spanish Cup. Feels a bit like deja vu, but is Juan Mata the best A-League import since Del Piero, Jacob?
I mean, on paper, yes. But is the quality still there as the thing? Because that's the thing. Del Piero came here and showed that he hadn't lost a step and was still one of the, preeminent players in the world and was easily the best player in the league that season. We had Nani at Melbourne Victory, and that, again, a player with a good CV and a strong case for being one of the biggest imports, and he did absolutely nothing. There's no guarantees here, and it does, though, I will say, feel a bit like the A-League of old here, where these big teams are starting to get these imports in. I saw somebody say, all right, so which washed-up English player are the Jets going to sign to make it feel like 2012 again? But no, it's good to see, but it's also a bit strange, right? Because we've been hearing for months and months and months now, since the end of last season, about how, financial austerity, and it's going to be tough for teams to be able to make these sort of signings. I mean, we've now got 2 this season from the 2 Sydney clubs. We haven't seen that in, the last few years where the league's been in a financially similar position. So it's like they've just decided, we're just going to go for it now, which I kind of like. It's kind of a bit fun.
Yeah. It is worth noting that the 2 clubs, though, Sydney FC and the Wanderers, they are well taken care of financially. So between themselves and probably Victory and obviously Melbourne City as well, they're the 4 clubs that are probably pretty stable no matter what.
And the rumour is, the salary of about 350,000, which honestly isn't even that bad for not just an import player, but, a designated / marquee type player in the A-League. I think what we were hearing a few years ago was Ikonomides was on probably about the same or even more. He was one of the highest paid he was on more. So, that's a pretty solid deal from the Wanderers. So, perhaps actually a shrewd bit of business to be able to get a player of his quality on a relatively decent deal. But again, it remains to be seen if he's actually going to be any good, because you can have the best CV in the world. Adelaide United signed Romario back in the day. So, and that was a completely forgettable spell. So, you can have these great players, but whether or not they perform and whether or not they turn up is going to be something different. But I think perhaps with it being, the case of the Wanderers have their visa, massive import. Sydney FC have theirs with the derby as well. Perhaps that'll bring a bit to it and hopefully lift the level of performance from the 2 players, especially if they sort of misfire to start with. If they can, that game in particular should be a good point for them to be able to actually fire up and get into the swing of things.
All of a sudden, they actually have to earn their status as the big marquee in the league. I do want to clarify as well, when we're talking about Douglas Costa and Juan Mata and comparing them to Del Piero, we are talking about their reputation when they come into the league. Like, obviously, we've said this as well. They have to perform on the pitch if they want to meet that Del Piero expectation. But he is exciting, Will. Spanish legend, played for Chelsea, Manchester United, all these big clubs, and won this World Cup and the European Championships. That's a big name.
Yeah, I probably think that this is the bigger name just in regards to his Premier League playing. I think that's relevant to more of the Euro snobs here. So no, even tonight at training, I had a bunch of guys there saying that they were going to definitely get down to a game, and they just sit there blankly when I talk about the A-League with them. So it's already working. But no, it is massive. I think that's a better track record. I'm not convinced about the recent seasons. I think there was only a handful of appearances, maybe even one in Japan, half the games in Turkey. So it's just, I think we're filled with pessimism at the moment because of the track record. And we said this when Costa was joining, but like Sturridge, Nani, they have not done a service to everyone's kind of hopes. So I feel like we're instantly kind of pessimistic for sure, and they need to, both of these players need to prove it on the field. But I said the same thing with the Douglas Costa move. Definitely these more financially stable clubs, it's definitely their chance to kind of get a leg up and really take advantage of the lack of funds. And yeah, 350 grand is pretty shrewd business. I agree, Jacob. So no, I'll definitely be at all of the games. The derby will be massive, and I think specifically for the derby for these two sides, I think that's a game where these imports kind of realize, there actually is football culture here. I think there's always clips of them talking about it afterwards, how surprised they are with the culture, and especially with those games. I think they're the best we have on offer. In terms of replicating kind of European experiences for sure. So no, it'll be interesting to see how they go, and I think it'll be a fiery derby for sure.
I think the other thing as well with like sort of the comparisons to Del Piero is the cultural impact that Del Piero had as a signing, around the league and in football in Australia, because there is such a huge Italian community here. Del Piero is he's a god to them almost, that was huge. It would have been like, getting Maradona in his heyday sort of thing, right? Like, because of just the status that he had as a player. And, having such a big Italian community was a big boost. Whereas, while there's strong Brazilian and Spanish communities here, I don't think they're necessarily as big. But I do think that they both have the opportunity to become that sort of cultural icon that Del Piero did in his time at the league, especially if, like you're saying, Will, if they can perform, because, you've got the chance to have two of them in here at the same time. That would be just huge.
Yeah. And I know Paletti doesn't love the idea of putting these derbies right in round one, but they have clear air to market this derby up, Douglas Costa against Juan Mata, these two European legends. Whilst the optimism is still at its peak for their performance levels, maybe we'll get a rude awakening, who knows. But while the hype is still there, you have weeks on weeks to plug this derby. That's going to be a very exciting game. Another thing that Western Sydney Wanderers fans will like to hear is that he has a track record for beating Melbourne Victory as well. When he was playing for Vissel Kobe, beat Victory in an Asian Champions League qualifier. I think it finished 4-3 in extra time off memory. It was a bit of a crazy game. But yeah, has a W over Melbourne Victory. So the Wanderers supporters will enjoy that. Let's get to a bit of other transfer news, and this is a departure from Western Sydney because Marcus Yunus has been loaned out to PSV Eindhoven's reserve team. This is a full season with an option to buy, and as part of this agreement, will we understand that Western Sydney agreed to this move because Yunus also signed a 2-year extension with the club.
Yeah, so in that sense, it definitely makes sense. It did seem like a bit of a kind of a weird transaction at first, but I mean, you're getting a fee for the loan. I'm pretty sure as well. There was it was about 80 grand for that, which is a quarter of Juan Mata's wages. So, but yeah, so it's not much risk, and then the transfer fee that they with the option for is obviously be substantial enough to make an impact for them. So it all obviously made sense to them. And yeah, even though the optics were a bit confusing at first, I think this is a kind of good view for the league. So I think you'd want to keep him here. It looked like one more season, and then maybe he could make that permanent move somewhere else. But it's a good opportunity to try and break his way into even potentially the PSV first team. But it would be a good experience in the youth team there as well.
There were rumours swirling as well towards the back end of last year where he was having those fallouts with Marco Rudan that he might be headed to Adelaide, and he's signed for the partner team of Adelaide United in PSV, which I kind of find quite amusing. But no, it's an interesting bit of business, like you said, Will, because it does seem confusing, But then you look at it from the Wanderers' point of view, and they've still got him on their books for 2 years. So if he goes over there and it doesn't really work out for him, they still get Marcus Yunus back, right? And we've seen the quality that he does have. So even if it's not enough at this stage to break in over there in Europe, they get to keep him still for another year. And if it is enough, then they've got that, as we've been talking about for so many episodes now, that leverage to be able to negotiate a good fee for it. So no, definitely from the club's perspective, it makes a lot of sense.
So there's an option to buy in this deal. So I'm assuming that a price will be set after 12 months.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's PSV's option. So interesting deal there. Not a transfer as such, Will, but the news down out of Melbourne City, broken by Nicholas Lennon, is that Max Caputo has suffered a major leg injury. We know that Melbourne City were going to give Caputo the pre-season to try and earn the starting spot in Melbourne City in the number 9 position. Obviously, he won't be able to do that anymore, but City do have visa spots yet to be filled, and I'm assuming they will have had a plan in place anyway. It seems that will definitely be activated now.
Yeah, it's a shame as he was built up his minutes towards the end of last season, and yeah, you just want to see these young, especially strikers, where there's not too many options coming through. It looked really good in stretches when he had the consistency in minutes. So no, was looking forward to a big season, but definitely for some scrambling for City to kind of work out what they're going to do instead. Because yeah, as we said, and last season even they were very short on striker options. So yeah, you never want to see this happen, especially just out of a season and not even getting a chance to kind of make a stamp early on or anything. So no, tough, but yeah, a replacement will have to be sorted out.
Yeah, there was a place they could read about some of the local options that might be available.
Jacob did do a wonderful piece on the website, rambleaustralia.com.au, talking about the need for strikers in the A-League and some of the NPL options that have been coming through during the winter season and some international rumours as well. Well worth a read. It is very good. Let's go to the dub now, because the big news out of here is that Michelle Heyman has re-signed for Canberra United. The rumours were really going wild on this one. She has reportedly received offers from almost every A-League women's side. We know about West Ham as well, many, many international clubs, but in the end, Canberra United somehow will have managed to keep her. It's, you know, in kind of a football sense, you don't really see these kind of loyalty plays happen very often, but she is towards the twilight of her career. It's clear that she has a very big motivation to inspire the next generation of not only young kids, but specifically Canberra people as well, it seems. And she had a hell of a season last year. She's broken back into the Matilda squad and Canberra United with this big ownership cloud that's coupled with the men's attempted expansion. A lot of players have left this dub side, but they have Michelle Heyman.
Yeah, it can't be understated how important that is to kind of just keep a positive attitude around the club as well. She's such a big draw card to the league, especially with the recent Matildas recall up as well. I think there's a lot more people that are even more knowledgeable of her, and it's in a really critical time to keep her in the league and keep banging in the goals. So no, so good to see. And yeah, as you said, I think it just didn't make sense. I think West Ham were offering a shorter deal only to the end of the year, and it didn't really make sense. I think it was a bit of risk on her part if it kind of didn't work out, and then she would have struggled to kind of come back into the league, halfway through the season. So no, so good to see her stay, and yeah, just a good sign for the club.
Do you reckon, Jacob, like we saw after the end of the Women's World Cup, Courtney Vine was kind of the one big Matilda that stayed behind? I think that status has now been handed over to Michelle Heyman.
To Heyman, yeah. I think quite possibly like a passing of the torch, but in the other way, right? Because it's the younger player passing it to the older player. But no, it's got a very similar feeling. And I think it's good for the league to be able to keep these sort of players, although that sounds quite selfish, because when we're talking about the men's side of things, we're always talking about wanting these players to go on to Europe to bigger things, whereas with the women's game it's we want to keep them for ourselves. Can't really have it both ways, but no, it's great to see. And like Will said, she's such a big draw card because you're pretty well guaranteed to see her score most games, which is one thing, but the fact that she's coming off of the back of a really, really good season, even at the age that she is, like you were saying, Lockie, sort of in the twilight years of her career, she's still able to put, a bunch of goals in the back of the net. It's a really, really awesome thing to see. I think it's good signs as well for Canberra United because they're able to keep arguably their biggest player. It's sort of a case of it's not necessarily now it's all going to be fine and everything's going to be perfect, and but this is sort of the big first step, because I think losing Heyman, there would have been a lot of questions asked about what future does this club have. But at least being able to keep her for at least, this short period of time of over this season, you can sort of put that on the back burner, because, hey, we've got Heyman again. So,
Yeah. I think the unfortunate situation it is, and Pletty will be able to touch on this better than I when they get back to the bod, because they're in the Gold Coast at the moment. But Canberra have lost a lot of players already before this Heyman situation was dealt with. So I think those questions are still there, unfortunately. So it remains to be seen how they go this season. I'm not too optimistic, to be perfectly honest. But the Heyman news in isolation, of course, absolutely brilliant. One last transfer, we've mentioned his name before, but Aiden Krustic has signed with Serie B side Salernitana. Oh no, Christian.
Salernitana.
Salernitana. Okay. Aiden Krustic has signed with Serie B side Salernitana. This is a permanent deal. We thought it was a loan initially, but this is permanent, away from Hellas Verona. So the shackles are freed on him, and hopefully he gets back to form and we see him in a Socceroos shirt soon. Whilst we were busy last week talking to Alessandro Ciccazzi, the APL, FA and PFA jointly committed to phasing out the Socceroos clause in Australian transfer regulations. These organisations concluded that the rule was no longer fit for purpose. For these reasons, the evolution of Australian football, broader globalisation of the football economy, increased investment in A-League clubs by international football club ownership groups, increase in value of A-League players, increased interest in players moving between A-League clubs, and longer A-League player contracts. Of course, this all started when we saw that the Alex Paulson loan move from Bournemouth back to, well, I shouldn't say back to New Zealand, but to Auckland. Obviously, just being bought by Wellington Phoenix, that kind of contradicted the rules. But we do know what is happening now. So this phase out will take place over the next 12 months ahead of the 25-26 season. The first phase, a maximum of 2 players from any multi-club network can be loaned back into the A-League at any one time. Those are the players that wouldn't have been allowed under the previous arrangement. So there's a small opportunity for A-League players purchased more than 2 registration periods ago, but I'm not sure if we'll actually get any real-world scenarios of that taking place. But the key one is that the APL may apply the salary of a player from either their current parent club or their previous A-League club towards their new club's salary cap. So, for example, Alex Paulson, he earned X salary at Wellington last year. He earns Y salary with Bournemouth. Now, in this scenario, of course, you would assume naturally that the Bournemouth salary is higher, but that doesn't always have to be the case. The APL may, and the keyword is may, take the highest salary and then apply that Bournemouth salary to Auckland's salary cap. But they are reserving the right to do whatever they want, which seems like a bit of common sense because you can never be too certain applying these kind of blanket rules. But it seems like a good compromise, Jacob, until we get to a full evaluation of the domestic transfer rules.
Yeah, and look, I've spoken out about my dislike of multi-club ownership in football in the past, but I think that this is, it's not a symptom of that, but I think it's a way of trying to, in a way, regulate it. Because while the Socceroos clause had that intention, it was also very restrictive, and actually, I don't think it was necessarily, as the organisation should have said, fit for purpose. And bringing in this thing where you do have those options and that little bit of leeway and the ability to use the judgment to determine what the best way about it is, on a case by case basis, I think makes a lot of sense, because there will be times where it's clear that teams are gaining a competitive advantage by having an extremely rich parent club, right? And they're able to buy up a lot of talent for this other club and then loan them back or sign them back onto the smaller club in the A-League and that sort of stuff. But, as you said, until there's a domestic transfer system where players can move between the clubs, with the clubs paying a fee and, opening that up, this is the only way for clubs realistically to be able to get players that are on contract at another club on their books. And, it sucks that that's the only way to go about it at the moment, but that is the case. So, it does make a lot of sense for them to have looked at this and to have determined that completely, like having the Socceroos clause where it's, that it's a zero-sum game, there's absolutely no way around it, to now being, right, okay, you can do it, but we reserve the right to be able to punish you in some way, whether that be, financial with the salary cap or whatever it might be. I think it just makes a lot of sense. As I said, I'm not a fan of the fact that it has to be in place because of the way that football is headed commercially, but, desperate times call for desperate measures sort of things. That it's not desperate, but, the fact that this is what football has become in terms of having multi-club ownership, combined with the fact that there's no domestic transfer system, means that having something like this in place, it's a good and it's a smart move. And like you said, Lockie, I think it's actually worded really well to give the right to be able to do something to, not just give a competitive advantage to these clubs that are part of bigger networks.
So this really does feel, Will, like a precursor to a proper domestic transfer system. We know that James Johnson, CEO of Football Australia, has publicly been pushing it for a couple of years now. The PFA representing the players, there'd be no reason for them not to be incentivised to do it, to provide better outcomes for their players. The APL seem like they're on board now as well. Part 2 of this announcement is that a broader investigation into the A-League's economic model will take place, review the DTS, review salary caps, which is not to suggest the salary caps will go away in any sense, but potentially manage them a little bit differently. All these different kind of economic statutes which govern player contracts and transfers in Australia. So it feels like we're heading in a good direction towards this domestic transfer system.
Yeah, a review is definitely well needed. I think the landscape in football in general has just changed so much, and a lot of these rules that might be looked at, the transfer system allowing clubs to pay fees to each other. I think a lot of people's panic about it is, the clubs don't have enough money, but it won't necessarily, it just stops clubs from being hindered with weird releases and all of this. I think it just makes everything smoother, and in a way, like, the clubs can obviously then earn money easier as well. I think just the turnover, might increase it, and we see a lot of sideways movement, things like that. But no, this has definitely needed to be looked at for a while, and I'm glad that it looks like it's a priority for them to get it right. I think the only downside to this whole Alex Paulson rule, exception to the Caceres rule, are we calling it?
Yeah,
it was just the announcement of it. It was the timing with the announcement at the club at Auckland, and we got to kind of fix up the rule to let him in as well. So it was just a bit of clarity, and the optics of the announcement and timings didn't do themselves any favors. But overall, you can't really argue with the benefits that this will have on the league. So excited to see it, and maybe. Yeah, things like the salary cap are looked at, and the minimums are brought down of required spending and things like that. So this all looks like it's going to be made to benefit the club. So yeah, exciting.
Yeah. So we do know that multiple clubs approached the APL in May to get rid of the Socceroos clause, which potentially predates Paulson's activity. I don't know. It'd be very interesting to know that the order of events behind closed doors, as you say. It would be very interesting. But the other news out of New Zealand is that the A-League's came out with a post on Thursday formally announcing the new derby between Wellington and Auckland as the Kiwi Classico. It is worth noting that Joseph Esposito at the A-Leagues came out and confirmed that wasn't an A-Leagues decision. So I'm assuming it's the clubs, Football New Zealand, whatever those kind of bodies decided on the Kiwi Classico. There were a couple options floating about, Jacob. The Kiwi Clash got turned down, unfortunately. I don't think people are particularly pleased, at least the initial reaction that I've seen online. I know there were a couple of names, maybe a little bit closer to home, that New Zealanders were calling for.
Yeah, well, I like that you say that the Kiwi Clash was rejected, because I didn't realise that we'd formally submitted a bid for the name, but there you go, we learn something new every day. But no, you're right, that social media in, top mid-season form already, absolutely ripping into everything that's announced, and this is no exception to that. A lot of the suggestions that I'm seeing are to just convert it to, or translate it into Maori, and having it as the local native language, you know, and it sounds awesome. It's really cool. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but you know, it then has that connection of it being inherently, you know, Kiwi or from New Zealand. You know, it brings in that element to it that something like Kiwi Classico, it does sound a little bit corporate and a bit bland. But you know, it's one of those things
Perhaps
where
more casual friendly.
it's quite, yeah, it is a bit, but it's like, why are we using Classico? Like, you know, that has these connotations to world football of, you know, like the Super Classico in Argentina or El Clasico in Spain.
Yeah, they've never played each other before. I don't know how it's
Yeah,
a Classico.
there's none of that history yet to you know, not justify, but you know, vindicate such a grand name as Classico.
Yeah.
Can something be a classic if it's never happened before, you know? But it's also a case of people calling for let names happen originally, which I think is, you know, it makes sense. It's fair enough because there does seem to be a push, and it makes sense from a marketing perspective to be able to have a name that you can, you know, attach to a certain fixture, because then you can do your marketing around that. But, you know, in Melbourne, for instance, with, you know, the three teams there, and there's always seemed like there's felt a need to push certain names for things when perhaps there's a bit of pushback from the fans, and I think this is kind of in a similar one. But I guess we'll just see. I think it might be one of those ones that kind of cheesy to start with, but then the fans love as it goes on, because it just has that sort of A-League just quality to it in a way. But yeah, like you said, Esposito though saying it wasn't an A-League's decision, which is, I think, quite an interesting point there, that perhaps a lot of these people that are outraged on social media are missing, is that it's not, you know, the people in the boardroom at the league that came up with this. It seems to be some other arrangement instead. So
I love that you've attempted to quantify that kind of A-league-y kind of traits that seems to just fester around a little bit. I think you're onto something there. The Brisbane Roar have fallen 2-1 in the semi-finals of the Bandodka Trophy over in India. They lost to Odisha, who are a decent Indian Super League team. I don't think there's any shame in losing to them while still in pre-season. But international travel, which is rare for an A-League team, I'm looking forward to hearing how it went from players and coaches when they get back to Australia. Also on tour at the moment are the Australian under-23s. They're touring the Pacific Islands at the moment. They beat Vanuatu 3-0, I believe the score was, on Thursday afternoon. That's the senior team, by the way. And this squad is mostly full of 20 and 21-year-olds at the beginning of their new cycle. So, it's really hard to gauge probably what the results in these kind of Pacific Island matches. Obviously, there is a massive gulf in resources and quality there. But, you know, 3-0 win, can't have too many complaints.
Yeah, no, it's a lose-lose these games, isn't it? It's the you lose them, you're terrible, and you win them, and you should have. So this is just about blooding in the kind of next phase of players, and as you said, they're you know 20s and 21, so early 20s there. So definitely a new phase, and no, just exciting. There's some names in there that we've seen before. I think all or most of them were A-League.
Yep.
A-League players. So, and the minutes that they have, you know, in their legs already is very promising. I think the average professional appearances for each of them was about 50 per player as a squad. So yeah, no, exciting stuff, and just these important matches in the legs, no matter the opposition, and on tour is kind of a perfect way to prepare them for environments. So exciting to see, and we definitely have a talented crop coming through.
Seem to be having a good time on the beaches over there as well in the Pacific
Not the
Islands.
worst away trip, there.
Having a good time. We do have to finish on a rather serious topic. We heard a little over a week ago, I think it was, Patrick Yazbek was suspended by the MLS for 2 games. The rumours circulating wildly on social media that he was allegedly telling a player that he would see him next Tuesday. We know that is not the case. In actuality, he used the anti-gay F word in a game in the MLS and was therefore suspended for 2 matches under their policy. Obviously disappointing, Jacob, on an individual sense for Yazbek. he will have to learn from this experience, but also just demonstrating, and I saw Vince Rugari tweet about this as well, lots of people kind of running on this information with nothing really based in fact. Just a little reminder that it's worth not believing everything you see on social media.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the MLS's policy has come to bite them here because while the idea is to sort of stop this court of public opinion from happening, all it's actually done is stoke the fires of it by not revealing what was actually said and letting this misinformation run rampant. And yeah, obviously an extremely just awful situation, really, because this is not something that you want to hear, anybody be saying, let alone professional athletes in, this sort of a public setting during a match. Like it's really, really poor. And Paletti pointed out, they tweeted that seems to be a thing for Australian athletes at the moment, which is, a worrying sign as well, that perhaps these issues with homophobia and things just still sort of have their grip on sports. Not just here, of course, it happens around the world. And that's a really disappointing thing, because it does feel like, at least on the surface, we're making these great strides towards it, towards acceptance and an equal playing field, and these sort of incidents might suggest that perhaps it's not all as great as it can be and should be. But like you said, Lockie, this is something he has to learn from. And I'm actually surprised it's only a 2-game suspension, considering that this is what has been reported to have been said, because it's a very strong word to use, and 2 games does seem like perhaps it's not quite a harsh enough penalty. But yeah, you're going to hope that from here on, Paddy Yazbek can sort of reflect on this moment and go, yeah, that's really not a good move for me to have made, and that's not a good thing, and I don't want to be that sort of person, because if it's something that he doesn't reflect on, how's that going to impact the rest of his career? And obviously, from that perspective, you don't want that to happen. But also, you just don't want it to happen for, athletes who are representing this country, really. To be, embroiled in this sort of stuff is not a good look. So, no, it's a really somber note to be ending the podcast on, but it's something that obviously we have to talk about. It's something we unfortunately have to talk about, and yeah, hopefully we can move on. Yazbek can learn from this and understand why it's such a serious thing, and why we're trying to make these steps towards eradicating that sort of language from sports, because it's just not on.
Yeah, great strides taken, but still a long way to go. And if you're on Twitter and you see news coming, do a little bit of research. Just a little reminder for that. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thanks again to Manscaped for supporting our show. Use code ROUNDBALL for 20% off and free shipping at checkout. Will Booth, thank you for your company, mate.
Thank you. Glad I made it in the end. Nearly turned off that Socceroos game, so did make my appearance in the end. But yeah, good to be here.
Glad you could sit through it. Jacob Stevens, thank you.
It's been a pleasure as always, Lucky.
All right, we'll be back on Tuesday just before that next Socceroos game against Indonesia. Thank you all very much for listening at home. Goodbye.